Today on Touching Lives.
You can't put enough laws on books to make people be good neighbors. Real love will get you to a point where you can't help but be a good neighbor. Being a good neighbor has nothing to do with obeying a law. Being a good neighbor has everything to do with having the love of God in your heart.
With hope and encouragement for life, this is Touching Lives with James Merritt.
Jesus tells a story of a traveling man. It's a very famous story. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. If you brought a copy of God's Word, Matthew, Mark, Luke, we're in the Gospel of Luke, it's Luke chapter 10. And in this story, in fact, let me tell you how the story starts out. Jesus didn't just start telling a story about good neighbors. It actually started with a lawyer who asked a good question, or it seems like a good question, but he really had a bad motive. So we're going to pick up in Luke 10, verse 25. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Now, the beautiful thing about this is he does something that is really good to do with this lawyer. The lawyer says, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And here's what Jesus does. That's why I love Jesus. I mean, he's just so brilliant. You never get anything on Jesus. He said, "Look, you're the lawyer. You're the PhD. You went to seminary. You're the expert in the law. I'm just a lay rabbi. You tell me what the answer to that question is." Verse 26. He said to him, "Well, what's written in the law? Have you read it? How do you read it?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you'll live." Now, for a moment, there's a smile on this lawyer's face, because Jesus had just said, you get an A for your answer. You have given the absolute correct answer. And then all of a sudden, the smile disappears, because the lawyer now realizes he had just fallen into his own trap. Verse 28, and he said to him, "You've answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And then Jesus does something that he did all the time, and I really believe it drove people nuts. Have you ever noticed how many times people would ask Jesus a very straightforward question? Just give me a yes or a no. And Jesus would say, "Let me tell you a story." And I can imagine I can see it right now. There are people in the crowd going, "Here we go again. Why can't the guy just give a straight answer? Just tell the guy who the neighbor is." Jesus says, "Let me tell you a story." And Jesus begins to tell this story about people traveling on the Jericho Road. Now, I've been on the Jericho Road. I only got to go one time. You can't even travel that road anymore. It's since been shut down. It's been closed. The reason is it's too dangerous to travel because of how steep it is and how treacherous it is to navigate. Let me give you this illustration. The Jericho Road's only 17 miles long. Here's the problem. It drops from Jerusalem, which is 2,700 feet above sea level, to Jericho, which is 800 feet below sea level. In other words, almost every mile that road drops a football field, almost every mile. And it's a very, very steep road. Furthermore, back in the day, it was desert land. It's still desert land, but it was a land that was crawling with robbers and with thieves and cutthroats. And matter of fact, it was such a dangerous road to travel, the nickname of the road was the Way of Blood. It was one of the most crime-ridden areas all around Jerusalem. Bible scholars estimate there were about 12,000 thieves that roamed that desert area looking for people to rob. It was kind of like, today we've got modern-day gangs in the inner city, particularly in other places, roaming around like packs of wild dogs, attacking innocent victims and beating them and robbing them. Well, that's kind of like what they were facing back then. So Jesus is telling this story. And he tells a story about another victim. There's a man lying on the side of the road, and Jesus is very, 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 very specific. He was robbed. He was beaten. This is important. He was stripped naked, and he was literally left half dead, or maybe for dead. Now, there's a lot that we don't know about this guy. We don't know where he was from. We don't know what he was doing in that area. We don't know what his name was. None of those things are important. Here's the only thing we know about this man, and the only thing Jesus wants to know about this man. This was a man in need. This was a man in need of somebody to help him. Now, some of you are old enough to remember there's an old saying, "A friend in need is a friend indeed." A friend in need is a friend indeed. And here's what Jesus does. He shows us there are only two ways you are always going to respond when you come across somebody in need. I'm going to share those with you this morning. And you're going to relate to this when I tell you how we do this. Number one, when you come across somebody that's in need and you're trying to decide, are they my neighbor or not? Am I their neighbor or not? Number one, you will rationalize the situation in your mind. That's what, and we all do this. I want you to watch this. The story actually breaks up into two parts. It's real easy to understand. Here's part 1, verse 31. Now by chance, by the way, not by chance, God had it all planned. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Immediately, you're listening to this story, and optimism is rising. You're saying, oh, great, this is a priest. He's a holy man. He's a righteous man. He's a religious man. Surely, he'll be the first person to help this man. But the moment he sees the guy, Jesus said, he crossed the street. He passed by on the other side. Well, that raises a question. Why would he do that? Well, he did the same thing that you and I do. His mind starts turning. He's looking this situation up and down. He says, look, this guy's he's unconscious. He's naked. So I don't know if this guy is a Jew or a Gentile. Now, if he's a Jew, I'm obligated to help because a priest had to help a Jew, but you didn't have to help a Gentile. Well, the guy's naked, right? I mean, there's no way to know whether the guy is a Jewish or not. I mean, or Gentile. And there are certain places you don't want to look. So he says, look, I don't know, I don't know what this guy is, right? Well, furthermore, this guy could have been dead, and the priest knows if I touch this guy and he's dead, boom, I'm ceremoniously unclean. I got to turn around, not only drag this guy back to Jerusalem, I will be ceremoniously unclean. I will be quarantined for a solid week. I've got to wash. I've got to take off my clothes, burn my clothes. I'll be apart from my family. Can't even explain to them where I've been. And then he said, wait a minute. This guy's been beaten. He's been robbed. That tells me there are robbers in the area. If I stay around, I might get beaten up and robbed too. So maybe I just better go my merry way. And so he leaves. And hope sinks. But then Jesus says a Levite comes by. And hope rises. Oh, the Levite, the royal blue blood, belongs to the tribe of Levi. A Levite was an assistant to the priest. Probably in the story was an assistant to the very same priest that had just passed this guy by. So this Levite comes by and he probably looks at this guy and he says, wait a minute. I know the priest was just by here just a while ago. He didn't help this guy. Evidently he knows something I don't know. If he didn't get involved, why should I get involved? Now the truth of the matter is, we're not told why these guys passed by on the other side, but what we do know is somehow they were able to rationalize in their mind with a clear conscience why they should pass by on the other side and not help this guy at all. And here's the amazing thing. Had you been listening to that story 2,000 years ago, you would have bet everything that you had that one of those two people would have helped that guy. Because after all, they were the religious people. They had just left church. They're supposed to be the people connected to God. And yet, they pass by on the other side because they just don't want to get involved. Now, there's a little something else going on here you wouldn't have picked up if you hadn't been in that crowd. Because that crowd's starting to murmur because what Jesus is subtly illustrating is this priest and this Levite really were no better than the robbers that robbed this guy and beat this guy and left this guy for dead. You say, well, why do you say that? You see, you can be a thief in one of two ways. You can take something that does not belong to you, or you can keep something that belongs to someone else. This man deserved to be helped. This man deserved to be ministered to. This man deserved good to be done to him, but they did not do it. Proverbs 3:27 says, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. If you do, you're a thief. James 4:17, whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it's sin. If you know there's a right thing to do and you don't do it, you are a thief. And the problem with both the priest and the Levite, here's the problem. The problem with them is not what they did. They didn't beat the guy. They didn't rob the guy. They didn't strip the guy. The problem was not what they did. The problem was what they didn't do. The priest and the Levites were bad neighbors because they refuse to be good neighbors. Now, I know a lot of you think pastors live a charmed life, right? I know a lot of your attitude, man, I wish I only worked one day a week. I mean, I get that, okay? But let me tell you, one of the worst things that can happen to a pastor, I'm being honest, I'm not trying to be funny, I'm being serious. One of the worst things that can ever happen to a pastor is when God gives him the opportunity to apply his own sermon. Let me tell you what happened this week. Tuesday, I'm headed to South Carolina to preach, and I stopped to get something to drink at QT. I love to stop at QT. I get out of my car. As soon as I get out of my car, a man comes around the front of my car. He's disheveled. He's wearing really dirty clothes, and he gets right in my face, and he said, "Mister, can you help me?" And you know what's coming, right? So he points to this old beaten-up car. There's a woman sitting in the car. He points to this beaten-up car next to this gas tank, and he said, "Mister, my wife's mother died, and I just need some gas money to get the rest of the way there. I just don't have any money. Can you help me?" What do you think my mind did? I'm in overdrive. I'm looking at this guy, and I'm thinking, are you telling the truth? I don't know you. Next thought came to my mind, I bet you're an escaped criminal. I bet you're on the run. I bet you're trying to get away from the cops. And then I thought, you might even be a serial killer. You may be an axe murderer. I don't know who you are. And then I got to thinking, what's it going to cost me to fill his car up? I said, I could buy 2 boxes of golf balls with that money. I mean, why am I going to help this guy? And I'm just being honest. I came this close to saying, "Sir, I'm sorry, I can't help you." And then God speaks to my heart and says, "So what is this message you're going to be preaching to your people this Sunday?" Have you ever wanted to tell God just one time, would you just mind your own business? Have you ever wanted to do, how many of you ever wanted to do that, right? Okay. So I got this, man, can you just mind your own business? I'm just being honest. I'm like you. I don't sleep in 3-piece pajamas, and I don't have a red phone to heaven, okay? I'm just like you. I wanted to cross over to the other side. So I reached into my pocket, get out my money, give him the money. You didn't even know this story, did you? I was afraid to tell you. I give this man the money, and he tears up, and he thanks me. Well, I tear up, and about that time, I'm just telling you the whole truth. I noticed this crucifix around his neck. I said, "You wearing a cross around your neck?" I said, "You know Jesus?" "Yes, sir, I do." I said, "Do you really know Jesus?" He said, "Yes, sir, I do." I'm going to tell you something. I'm a Baptist preacher. You lie to me, God will kill you. You know Jesus? He said, "Yes, sir, I know Jesus." He said, "Matter of fact, if I didn't know him then, I know him now. I know Jesus." And he said, "Mister, really, thank you for helping me." And let me tell you what I said to him. I said, "No, sir, thank you for letting God give me the opportunity to be a good neighbor." He said, "Huh?" I said, "Never mind, don't worry about it, just go." Now, here's the point. When you come across somebody in need, and you begin to rationalize with your mind why you shouldn't help, why you shouldn't get involved, why you ought to keep your hands clean, why you should not be a friend indeed to a friend in need, do you know what you'll do every single time? You'll cross over to the other side every time. And that's one way you can do it. You can rationalize with your mind, salve your conscience, and just go to the other side. There's another way. You can respond to the situation with your heart. Now look what happens. These people in the crowd are listening to their story, and they've lost all hope. They said, "This is terrible. This man's going to die right by the side of him. I'm going to help him." But then Jesus says, "But then," and so they're thinking, "Hey, that's right. Surely there's a good Jew out there somewhere. Surely there's some good Jew that's going to come to the rescue." And then when they hear the next words out of Jesus' mouth, you could have heard tumbleweeds blowing all the way down to Egypt. People gasped when they heard the next word he said. Verse 33, "But a Samaritan." And puke buckets came out everywhere. But a Samaritan. I don't think I've ever heard use the word puke in a message. That's history. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. Now, boys and girls know this story as the story of the what Samaritan? The Good Samaritan. bad title. 2,000 years ago, as far as the Jewish person was concerned, the only Good Samaritan was a dead Samaritan. There was nobody that was more hated, more despised, more condemned, more looked down upon than Samaritans. Now, I don't have the time to tell you why. I'm just going to tell you they were publicly excluded from the synagogue. If you were a Samaritan, you could not go to church. They would actually pray. They would say out loud, God, please don't ever let a Samaritan go to heaven. Now, put bluntly, it was just racism. That's all it was, just racism. As a matter of fact, listen to this. If you really wanted to insult a person 2,000 years ago, you know what you do? And if I really want to insult somebody, you know what I do? I call them a Florida Gator. That's what I do. And if you really want to insult somebody, I mean, you really do 2,000 years ago, you know what you'd call them? A Samaritan. Matter of fact, the Pharisees on one occasion said this to Jesus, John 8:48. Are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and you have a demon? I mean, that was a double slap in the face. You not only are demon-possessed, you're a Samaritan. A Florida Gator, you're a Samaritan. Now, watch this. How do you think that lawyer and his Pharisaical buddies, when they heard this part of the story? Then a Samaritan comes along, and then they have to listen to this galling story. Verse 34, he went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. He set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when you come back. Now, what this Samaritan does is nothing short of amazing. When this man loads this naked guy on his donkey, who most probably was a Jew, takes this man in Jewish territory to a Jewish town, to a Jewish inn, he is putting his life on the line. Because under normal circumstances, a Samaritan would never walk into a Jewish town. Can you imagine? You're a Samaritan, and you're bringing a beaten, wounded, half-dead, naked man on your donkey into town. He's Jewish, and you're Samaritan. And what do you think those people are going to say? You did it. Because no Samaritan would do what you do. You think you're going to get away with this? And even though he was innocent, he legally could have been held responsible. Then to top it all off, the Samaritan gives the man enough money, the innkeeper, to cover his month, to cover all of his food, all of his expenses, all of his doctor bills for 3 weeks, and then says, that ought to prove to you, I'll be back. You'll come back to this town again? Somebody may kill you. That's okay. I'll be back. And if he owes any money, I'll pay it. Because he knew if he didn't and the man owed money, he could be sold as a slave forever and have to be separated from his family to pay off that debt. Now, the crowd is about to fall out already. I mean, they won't eat for days. They're so sick to their stomach. And then Jesus, this is another thing I love about Jesus. Jesus loved to drive the knife right into the hilt. You know what I'm saying? I love to do that sometime. So, driving it into the hilt, he looked at the lawyer and he says in verse 36, so which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And the lawyer's gagging. Listen, he can't even say the word. Look what he says to Jesus. The one who showed him mercy. I'll go ahead and say it. I can't, Florida Gator, I can't say it. To which Jesus, with a smile on his face, said, you go and do likewise. You could have heard grass growing. The table has been totally turned. The lawyer had asked the wrong question. The question is not, who is my neighbor? Because that assumes there are certain people who are your neighbors and there are certain people who are not. That question assumes if you're heterosexual, you're my neighbor. If you're homosexual, you're not. That question assumes if you're white, you are my neighbor. If you're black, you're not. That question assumes if you're a Republican, you are my neighbor. If you're a Democrat, you're not. That question assumes that if you are a Baptist, you are my neighbor. If you are a Muslim, you're not. That question assumes if you're a conservative, you are my neighbor. If you are a liberal, you're not. Jesus said, wrong question. The right question is, am I a good neighbor? The real question is, when you come to people lying on the side of the road, what do you see? That's the question. See, there's a reason, again, why we're told in this story. Every detail is important. He wasn't just beaten. He wasn't just robbed. He wasn't just left for dead. Jesus wants us to know this man is totally naked. Why is that in the story? There's no way to identify the race or the ethnicity of this person. There was no way to tell whether this person was a Jew or a Gentile. You know why? Because it didn't matter. It was irrelevant. You are a neighbor to all who are needy. Being a neighbor has nothing to do with proximity, with nationality, with popularity, or with ethnicity. It is all about not being greedy with people who are needy. Now let me ask you this, we're going to wrap this up. What was it that set the Samaritan apart from that priest and that Levite? Because they all had the same experience. Verse 31, the priest saw him and passed by. Verse 32, the Levite saw him and passed by. In verse 33, the Samaritan saw him and had compassion. See, what made the Samaritan such a good neighbor was not the color of his skin, but the character of his heart. Now, I'm going to get into politics just a little bit. I don't ever do just a little bit. Has nothing to do with Republican or Democrat, by the way. This is for all of them. There's something the Congress doesn't understand, the president doesn't understand, the courts don't understand, they'll never understand it. They keep trying, they just don't get it. You can't put enough laws on books to make people be good neighbors. Real love will get you to a point where you can't help but be a good neighbor. Being a good neighbor has nothing to do with obeying a law. Being a good neighbor has everything to do with having the love of God in your heart. And so you see, 3 men walked by that day. 2 men saw a nuisance. 1 man saw a need. Now, you know, normally I give you the key takeaway in the message up front in the message, but I didn't do that today. You know why? This is kind of a special key takeaway. I'm going to do something I've never done before in my ministry and never going to do again. I'm not a poet by nature, but I wrote a poem. And my key takeaway is a poem. I'm in my study, and God just gave me this, okay? And, for me, I think it's Robert Frostworthy. That's, just me. But this is the key takeaway. A neighbor is not defined by color or creed. A neighbor is defined by nearest need. A neighbor's not defined by color or creed. A neighbor's defined by nearest need. So here's my question to you. Are you a good neighbor? That's all I want you to ask yourself today as you walk out the door. Am I a good neighbor? Now you say, well, Pastor, how you can tell? Real easy. You can tell whether or not you're a good neighbor. Ask yourself one question and you'll know whether or not you're a good neighbor. Are you always constantly asking this question as you go about the daily walk of your life? How can I help? How can I help? If you're asking that question, you are a good neighbor. I hope you know who the real Good Samaritan is in this story. You do know who it is, right? It's Jesus. So I don't understand. Yeah, there was another man. He didn't walk down that Jericho road. He walked up that Jericho road. He wasn't going from Jerusalem. He was going to Jerusalem, and he was going with a cross on his back. And just like that Samaritan, he came to all of us in this world who were lying on the side of the road, and we'd been left for dead, stripped and naked by the world, the flesh, and the devil. He came to us by the side of the road knowing there was absolutely nothing we could do for him and did everything for us. He came to us on the side of the road knowing there was nothing we could give to him, and yet he gave everything to us. And like a good neighbor, Jesus was there. Like a good neighbor, Jesus was there. So I close with this. I love this story. It was during the wintertime in Europe. Snow was about a foot deep, and the man was working in a shoe store. And he looked out the window across the street, and there was a little boy. He was totally barefoot, standing in the snow, and he was standing right in front of a baker's shop, and it was obvious the boy was barefooted, no socks, no shoes, and it was obvious he hadn't had a lot to eat, was very, very hungry. He was standing over one of these grates they used to have in the street that was boiling hot air, trying to keep his feet warm. So here's the shoe store owner looking at this kid with no shoes, just looking at him. Here's the baker looking at the kid outside the window, all this food, he's hungry, just looking at him. And out of the blue, a little lady walks by. She stops and takes a look at this little boy, and she bends down beside him and speaks some kind words to him. She takes him across the street to the shoe store and buys him a brand new pair of shoes and some woolen socks. She buys him a coat, and then she takes him across to the bakery, and she gives him pastries and gives him a hot chocolate and gives him things to eat and drink. She bends down and she puts her arm around him and kisses him, and she goes to leave. The little boy's looking at her with eyes this big, and he says, "Ma'am, can I just ask you a question?" She said, "Sure." He said, "Are you God's wife?" And she just smiled and said, "No, I'm just one of his children." He said, "I knew you must be kin to him somehow." When you look at people the way Jesus looks at people, you'll be a good neighbor.
God longs to share his heart with us, to teach us to see as he sees. But sometimes it's hard to see through his filter of love when all we've known is judgment and rejection. If that sounds like you today, call Touching Lives at 800-413-1131. Let's pray together and ask God for a fresh perspective to learn to love as he does. Whether in the world of entertainment or education, storytelling is one of the most powerful forms of communication known to man. Jesus knew this. He often told stories as he taught during his years of ministry on the earth. He used parables to give us insight into God, his kingdom, and how we should represent him and his kingdom as followers of Christ. In the series Snapshots, Dr. Merritt takes a fresh look at 8 of Jesus' parables and highlights their importance to us today. Discover new insights from these timeless messages and learn to see the world through the lens of grace. Order your copy of Snapshots by calling 800-413-1131 or go to touchinglives.org. Sometimes ministering to those in need doesn't require you to be where they are. Your financial gifts and prayer support continue to allow the ministry of Touching Lives to deliver the good news of Jesus to locations you may never visit and to people you may never meet. But together we are broadcasting hope where it's needed most.